Hi, I'm Rob Chipman, and we're delighted to be here at Alpine Art and Frame with Susan Bonosconi, who is the curator and community manager for Alpine. And she's going to talk to us tonight about the art of framing and cover a lot of different aspects of framing. We've got several questions that have been asked by you, our members, and we'll be going through those as well. So we'll turn the time over to Susan.
Hi, I'm happy to be here and spend some time with you tonight to talk about the importance of framing your artwork and particularly even creating a relationship with your local frame shop. First, let me tell you a little bit about Alpine Art. We've been in business over 30 years. We've had a couple of different owners, but with this particular owner we have now, we have been working here for over 24 years. So my experience with framing has been about 10 years. Kathy and April has been with Alpine pretty much since the beginning. And Kathy framed back east for a while, was a certified picture framer, and then has been with Alpine Art for about 24 years. So we have about 4 framers and a couple different art consultants, and we work with, of course, you know, we do gallery shows. We have a space in front where we do exhibitions once a month with Salt Lake City Gallery Stroll, which is a nonprofit organization that a lot of galleries are a part of to kind of help further the visual arts and create that community, enhancing the visual arts in our community. And so we participate once a month with them, and we also are a custom frame shop. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why it's important to frame your art. I've worked with a lot of artists, and I remember one particularly. She spends a little bit on her framing, and she said to me, "My art deserves to be framed," and that always left an impression on me. Like it wasn't complete until it had a proper frame. And so and I know there's a lot that you might be thinking about framing. Certainly there's the expense, but I'm just going to go over about 5 points that I want you to think about when framing your art, especially as as artists, you're wanting to obviously sell your artwork, and the way you present it is really critical. So I'll go over these 5 points. First, a proper frame will enhance and honor your artwork. So my dad used to always say to me, if you keep your car clean and you take it to the mechanic and the mechanic sees that the car is clean, he's going to know that this person cares about their car, and he's like, believe it or not, they're going to pay a little extra attention to, maybe or not, this is what my dad said, in taking care of your car. It's kind of the same thing with art. If you value what you're doing, then you extend that in how you present it. So I know there's a lot of different options, but you can actually devalue the work by framing it inexpensively, because that can tell a story too about your artwork. So it demonstrates your professionalism. It demonstrates, kind of furthers your self-expression or your artistic expression, because you can help in designing how you would frame that art piece. And also when you invest in it up front, it also, not only does it's all about perceived value. I think art is necessary, but if there's, if you have to eat or have shelter, then sometimes maybe art, subjectively isn't necessary. However, if you show that value in your art piece, it can be perceived by the person that's coming into the gallery. They can see that the artist cares about their work, and you're saving them a step. If it's framed properly, then they don't have to go and get it framed. And so that's why that's important, that you pick a proper frame, and that also it's also better for the galleries and when they're hanging and demonstrating your work. Most artwork on paper, so if you're a watercolorist or if you do any sort of print work, needs to have a frame. And that, pastels particularly, and there's different ways of framing those. Pastels, for example, have a lot of particles, and so when we custom frame those, we actually put a space in the mat board so the particles, as that piece moves around, just in the nature of that particular medium, it will break away and can dirty the mat if it's pressed up against the artwork. So we do it in such a way that it still looks, it creates a sort of a channel in that framing so that it looks clean every time that it's presented. That's for pastels. And watercolors too. Now, when you're framing watercolors, we did a show here with the Watercolor Society, and there's this perceived perception I've heard with patrons that come to the gallery that they think, oh well, because they can't touch it or because there's glass, it almost creates a little bit of a barrier in how they interact with the art. If it's done well, with the proper kind of glass and with the matting, you can eliminate that barrier, that perceived barrier, from the person that's looking at your artwork. And some of these things are with mat boards, certainly, conservation mat boards, and there's a difference between decorative and conservative. The decorative mat boards will yellow over time. The conservation mat boards are acid-free and will interact well with your art over time so that it doesn't yellow and it preserves that quality, and also can always be released. So especially for, as trends change, if you have a beautiful woodcut or you have a beautiful watercolor and it's framed a certain way, years down the road, if you want to change that art piece, then it can be released easily. It's not permanently mounted to a mounting board or anything like that. It can be released and changed, which is value also for the collector because they have a piece that will be released and not permanently secured to something that would devalue the artwork. So that's something that you want to consider. And your frame shop, when you come in, your frame shop will work with you to really understand the proportion of mat boards. And it's really subjective and it's a personal aesthetic. Certainly most creative individuals, as artists are, have kind of an idea of how they envision it. And so we can work together and we can offer some ideas and go back and forth to see what would be best. You never want to scrunch that artwork. So in other words, you don't want to create a piece where there's just a little tiny bit of mat board and then it feels too squished in the frame. But that can all be worked out with your framer as we look at those different options together. And then preservation, something to think about too. I've hung quite a bit of art, and I know that it's a cost issue, and so there'll be a lot of art that, IKEA's a great place to pick up inexpensive art. But let me tell you, as a gallery and trying to hang those, it's incredibly difficult. They're incredibly difficult to hang. And often, if they get bumped, I've had it a couple of times where they'll fall off the wall and the art and the frame will shatter. So some of these frames that you can get that are inexpensive are made of a composite or a styrofoam. So aesthetically they look really good, but in transporting these, to the gallery or to other different shows, over time they can start to wear and chip and they can't be fixed. Now this can happen with a quality wood frame as well, but there's ways where we can touch that up a little bit better than one that's made of a composite. So that quality framing really goes a long way. Consider that in the lifetime of that art piece until it gets sold to the collector, as you're taking them here and there, you want something that's quality that will kind of be able to stand all of that moving around. So with your art, with your frame shop too, getting corners and proper ways of wrapping them, I think is important too. As if your piece doesn't sell when you pick that up, that you can take it to the next show. Hanging hardware. So I've seen so many crazy things with the hanging hardware and where the hardware is placed. you want to go down at least a third of the picture. You don't want it to, sometimes I've seen artists that hang it really high, and then when you put a hook, you can see the hook, and over time that wire will start to bend a little, right? It will start to get a little bit loose. So that's why you want to bring that wire down, because over time the weight of the art that's hanging on the wall will start to create, so soon if it's so high up, the wire will be higher than the art piece. So you want to be careful about where you put that wire. And with a frame shop, the way they put the wire on is almost art in itself. It's very beautifully wound in the back. It's very clean. And I've had patrons that have come through the show and pick up that art piece they're ready to buy and then flip it, turn it around to the back. And they're like, oh, this looks a little bit chintzy. And so they start to sort of second guess themselves, like, oh, I don't know, if, or they can see that it's on a panel board, and then they make up stories. So you just want to finish that off. Paper the back, make sure that it's clean, so that you don't want to discourage, you want to show that all of those details are taken care of. So the hanging hardware is really important. Sawtooths aren't great. Sawtooths can be good for a smaller piece of artwork, but again, you've got to follow what those gallery rules are if you're submitting into a show, because it can be a little bit difficult to hang and keep secure on the wall. Now remember, as a gallery is putting together a show, often there's more, there's many pieces, and sometimes it can be hung salon style, so there's many pieces. So as people are walking through and if things get bumped, if it's on a wire, it's more secure than sometimes on a sawtooth, and so it can sometimes fall off the wall. So those are the things to consider. So I'm just going to go over those points just to sort of summarize. Consider that framing your artwork, you want to honor your piece. It's part of that creative process. It's an extension. It's completion of your art piece after you create it. Getting the proper frame, the proportions of the mat board, all of those things show that you value what you do and you're honoring your piece with the proper frame. Consider those mat boards, using archival product when you're putting that together, because that can also be seen too. I know if people will buy things that are at an art show or something that's pre-matted, and sometimes the proportions are off. Sometimes the mat board is a little wider on the sides and the top. They're all different sizes. I mean, it's okay if you're just selling that print, but again, it's just that value and what you want to get out of that piece. You can take the cost of what it costs you, and if you create a good relationship with your gallery, they can steer you in the right direction and say, okay, let's go with this particular molding, because it's all about a couple of things. Economies of scale is one of them. The more that we can order this particular molding, the less expensive it can be for you. So they might steer you in a direction of a more economical price point. And if you have a lot of them, then you've got a negotiating power too of like, okay, I'm going to do 20 of these and I want them all to be this size. Then with your gallery or your frame shop, they can do some value engineering where they can look at, okay, how many pieces are we doing, what is the size, and see how many we can get out of the standard size mat boards and glass to get you the best price possible. So preservation, the proportions of mat board, and then also that hanging hardware. I'm not kidding, it's those little tiny details, because it looks different than what you'd see when you go into any of these box stores where they have art for sale that's like, $50 or $100 or whatever. There's a difference in the hanging hardware. You can tell something that's more customized when you see the hardware on the back and how it's put together. So that's about it.
Okay, so we've got several questions that many of you have submitted, and we'll just go through those with Susan now. One question that comes up quite a bit is, should you match the frame to the art or to the room it's going in, or ideally both?
It's a good question, and I think that I would say the best practice is to always match the artwork. Now, with that said, if I'm an artist and I'm selling my artwork, I want something that's a little bit more neutral, unless it enhances that art piece. And the designers that in your gallery, in your frame shop, can help you through these decisions. You don't want to frame to a room because, especially if it's just one piece, right? I mean, if you think about, if it's just this one piece, you don't want to match all of the woods. You know, if you've got, say, oak furniture or walnut furniture, you don't want everything to be walnut. It's nice to have a variety of woods in a room, even with furniture. It's the same way with art. You know, some of the, you can buy from the stores like matching end tables or matching nightstands. And in a real design space that's curated, often those are different because it adds an interest and a style to the room. It's the same way with art. Each piece should be honored individually, unless you've got like a series. You know, if you have a series of art pieces and they're all the same, then, I mean, you'd want to match, or sorry, the series, if they're all different, you'd want to kind of have coordinating framing. But I wouldn't match the room. I'd have an idea of where it's going to go. Like when I have people that come in and want to frame for their home, we talk about the room and where it's going and kind of what their aesthetic is. But as artists, I would always just frame to the piece without getting too trendy on some of those that you choose. You know, trying to keep it a little bit more neutral.
Great. What about, especially for works on paper, what about the decision to float the art on the mat or put it under the mat?
That's a good question. Again, what I keep hearing is that barrier between you, the patron, and the artwork that sometimes is created with glass. Because with a painting, they can kind of experience that. There's not that glare. So by putting, particularly if it has a deckled edge or if it's painted all the way to the sides, you want to show all of that. So then a piece like that, I would want to float on the mat board. Now you can float it just sitting on top of the mat with acid-free hinge mounts. And what these do is it will attach to the mat board, but it can also be removed from the art piece so that your art piece keeps its integrity. Or you can put it on a riser, which creates dimension, which can be very, very interesting and intriguing for showing your art. For woodcuts or even watercolors that have that deckled edge, sometimes floating it can create this intrigue and depth in the image. So that, I think, makes it interesting, but you just got to look at it. If I have more of a traditional piece, I might do something a little bit different and maybe add a fillet. So a fillet is think of it as a little tiny frame that fits inside the mat board. And what that does is frame your art piece inside the matting. So if we use like fabric mats, that can also really elevate your piece, and it can look more it gives that impression of the fine art because of how that's framed. It is going to be a little more expensive, so that's something you want to consider. We did a show with Brad Tier, and he did his woodcuts, and he framed these. I like to say he framed the heck out of them. In other words, he used fillets, and around the mat boards, he used fabric mats. He used big, chunky frames. And what was interesting is, and he was just selling the print. And it was quite a successful show because they could visualize what that could look like. They could visualize that art piece. He used museum glass, so there was no glare. So it was as if there was no glass on it. And so then they bought these pieces and then framed them themselves. This last exhibition that we did here, it was actually photography, and he was only selling the prints as well. But because of how he framed them, it created this interest of something they hadn't seen before, and he sold a lot of those prints. So that gives that buyer an idea of, oh, this is the possibility that how I can frame my art. And then they start to think creatively, like, ooh, I do like that frame, but I think I might go darker in my house. Then they start thinking about their space and how they would do that. So that's particularly for works on paper. You know, maybe you frame yours and you invest in that, and then you keep them for your shows, and then, you know, sell the art prints only. If that makes sense.
Speaking of glass, why don't you run through the options? Obviously, there's just plain glass.
Yeah.
All the way up to museum glass. Why don't you walk through the options there?
So, I don't know if you guys are able to see this on here. So regular glass does provide some amount of protection, but not a lot when it comes to UV rays. And even if they say, oh, it's not in direct sunlight, even hanging in your home, over time that will start to fade. So the best thing is UV glass, and quite frankly, the difference between regular glass and UV glass in a frame shop is dollars. It's not that much. So I would always default to UV glass, which is 99% protective of the UV light. Then there's of course museum. Now museum can run anywhere depending on size. I mean, it can add $65 to $75 depending on size to that, just for the glass. So it's quite a bit expensive, quite more in terms of price. So that, you know, if I were an artist and I was, you know, kind of building my collection to show, I might invest in that, because, especially my works on paper, because I mean, it's really extraordinary when you see them framed. But you got to be really careful with it too, and you don't want to clean it with glass cleaner that has ammonia or alcohol in it. You would just use a microfiber cloth to wipe it off. So the museum glass is fabulous, and it provides 99% protection from UV rays. But again, that price point can be, maybe you can kind of see it if I hold it there.
Yeah.
You can kind of see the glare. This is the museum, and this is the UV. So there is some glare. And I mean, and this is kind of dirty too. It needs to be wiped down. They do offer this. This is called UV 70. And so it's only rated at 70%. So it does provide some UV protection, but only rated at 70%, not 90%. So this is a good in-between between the UV and the museum, and the price point's a lot less.
And the glare protection is the same as museum,
Yeah.
just less on.
Exactly.
On
So then you're not getting that glare, and it's really nice. And so it's not that, even if it's rated at 70%, it doesn't mean your art's gonna burn up. You know, it's still providing some protection, and I still think it would last you years and years and years. So
Great.
that's a good option, is this UV 70. There is art glass that also provides, it's a brand that also provides that non-reflection, but there's no UV protection. So that one I'd be a little bit leery of. It's just a little bit less than the UV 70, but I would be concerned over time what that might do to your artwork. So I would just default to the UV 70.
Great. I've seen a wide variety of art, and this question deals with this, where you may have a little small piece of art in a mat that's quite large, and a large piece of art that has you know, a couple of inches of mat revealed. What kind of goes into those decisions?
So that really depends.
Just personal preference?
Yeah, preference and where that's going. It's been fun working now in this industry when someone will bring in this huge piece and put it on the table, and then once we release it from the frame, like you're saying, it's like tiny, but this beautiful ornate frame really creates this presence around this little teeny tiny, and the customer's always like, wow, I didn't realize that painting was so small. They actually do think that the painting is big, and that really speaks to the extension of what that frame does for the art. So it really is a preference, and sometimes, and it kind of where the trends are, sometimes they can be a little bit big and maybe too overpowering. So it just depends on that strength of that particular painting. You know what I mean? Like if it's a really strong, if something's really washed out or it's really faint and you put a big frame on it, it could almost overpower that. So I think it's just something you've got to work through together with your frame shop to say, here's what I want to create. Another thing is to keep in mind is liners. So when you're doing original artworks that are acrylic or oil, the way we do matting is with a liner. So this is a fabric over a wood molding or frame that goes inside the frame. So this is good for, I'll just grab one off the wall there. You know, where you want to create that white space around your art piece. So you can frame directly to the art, or you can create some space to kind of give border around it. And we would help, there's different width sizes. So whenever you're dealing with original art on panel or canvas or anything like that with paint, the mat becomes a liner, and then on paper it's mat board.
And then another question about the use of different color accent mat, you know, with a white and maybe another color or something like that. Is that just, again, a personal preference, or?
It is preference, and I think that it depends on kind of what's trending. Sometimes adding that accent can date your piece if you're not careful. So you can, and again, I think the designers at the frame shop are kind of up on those trends to see what's selling and what's happening in the market, what people are doing, what designers are doing, because your frame shop works with a lot of interior designers and architects, facilities people, so they're seeing a lot of this, and we also go to trade shows where we learn about kind of what's trending right now, what's the best way to show art. So I do think that they can be a beautiful little accent on, say, a watercolor. It can really liven that up if you bring a little accent. It can actually be a nice little jewel around that piece, but I probably would go like 3/16. I'd go really small, maybe.
Typically, maybe grabbing or highlighting a color that's in the art.
Yeah. And I mean, because I've seen some that have 5 or 6, and that is a whole different aesthetic. But I think as an artist, I would want to display it as simply as possible. And so an accent, I'm not opposed to it, but if cost is an issue, then I probably would omit that, or I do what's called a color core. So what that means, it's a mat board where when we cut into the image, I should have been a little bit more. I'm just going to show you this one because I could probably show better on the camera here. A color core is where the mat board is a solid color, but see the back is red, and then you can get this in white too. So you could do something like this. This is an 8-ply. These are different. There's different ply. A 4-ply is a regular size mat. This one's an 8-ply. We also have 6-ply. But you could do something like this, where you have just a little teeny tiny, and then see that makes it much more customized. Then it looks like, oh, I haven't seen that before. So it really, and then like this, there's a gray one with a black. This is a more of a 4-ply. So if you do want to add that accent, there are other ways of doing it instead of adding another mat. And this is probably a little bit less expensive than adding the 2 mat boards. So it's a good question.
Great. Let's talk about hanging. A few questions about hanging. By the way, when you were talking about hanging hardware, I know all of my frames I've done here are pretty consistent using D-rings. Is that what you recommend on the back?
Well, yeah, and you've got to pay attention. If you're going to be part of a gallery show, they will sometimes, I mean, I don't because I haven't been that specific about it, but sometimes the gallery will specifically say.
Insist on it.
I know when I hang art, when we do curate the shows at the Harmons, City Creek, and Farmington Station, I need D-rings because I work on a gallery system and there are these J-hooks that will hook onto the art. So the gallery usually will tell you what they prefer, because if you have a really thin frame, the D-rings won't work on there. There's a different kind of hanger, I think it's called a flanger, that kind of grabs onto the skinny side of the frame, and it's a little bit more secure.
Gotcha.
So I would see what the gallery suggests, but I would default to D-rings over. Don't do sawtooths. Yeah, I think that's probably one I would stay away from.
Okay.
Even if it's small, because I do wire.
One of the mistakes I see people making with art is they typically hang it too high.
Mm-hmm.
What's kind of the recommended height for hanging art? I've heard eye level may be different for a really tall person or a short person. But.
Right. So the general rule is 60 to 62 inches from the floor to the middle of the art, to the center of the art piece. Now you're right, and some museums even go 57. If you go to Phillips Gallery, that's a beautiful gallery, it's just right a couple streets over. They hang their art very low. So the idea is you want your art to be part of the space. You should never look up to look at the art unless, of course, it's like that piece is not high. Or you've got it stacked, but the art should be part of that atmosphere. And it's okay if there's a lamp in front of it. It's okay if there's something in front of it. But it's part of that space. So the way I do it is I measure the height of the art piece, divide it in half, add 60 inches, then subtract where the wire is. So if I pull my wire up, if there's a wire here and I pull it up and I measure what that distance is from the top of the wire and subtract that, and that will tell me from the floor how high I should hang it up.
Okay.
So it's a good rule of thumb, 60 to 62 inches from the floor to the center of the art piece.
What if there are two pieces of art you're putting together, one on top of the other? How do you?
It's always just an aesthetic thing. I mean, I probably wouldn't want my eye level to be in the center. I probably would want it to be at the art. But depending on how big those pieces are, if you've got two large pieces, I might bring it down just a little bit. And we want it to be a little bit up off of the floor, just in terms of, in a home. So that's really that's a good question. And I just would eyeball it. Like, what is it? Considering the people that are enjoying that space, because sometimes you've got a family or a group of people that are very tall living together versus some that are a little bit shorter. So, and then don't do them too close and don't do them too far apart. Give some space so that it's pleasing to the eye, that you can view both pieces without feeling like it's too squished.
Yeah. 2 or 3 inches,
Yeah.
is that
Yes.
typical space between two pieces of art?
Uh-huh.
What about if you're doing a gallery wall? How's the best way to, when you've got, say, 6 or 10 differently shaped, sized pieces of art? How's the easiest way to lay that out without putting a lot of nails in your wall?
Well, I first start with the largest piece, and you could either start with that as center. I don't like to do that. I like to be a little bit off center, and then I just build around it. To me, the way I approach it is a very organic way, where I'm putting up the bigger piece, and then I'm starting to create those paintings around them. What you want to avoid is trapped white space, and that's where you have an art piece. Like let me see if I can show you. Like if I'm hanging these art pieces here, and I'm hanging them, like I've got one here, and then I've got one, say here. How am I explain this? And then I have another one over here. See that little space right there? Personally, I call that trapped white space. So I'm not doing, let me take this piece here. So I'm hanging it where I don't like that little, see that little spot right there?
Space there.
Yeah. So I kind of want to avoid that. So I want to do something more like, I mean, obviously you have to work with the orientations, but kind of have them play off of one another. And honestly, it's really for personal aesthetic. I've gone to my friends' houses and they're like, oh, hide your gallery wall, Susan's coming over, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's too high. Or that, I mean, it doesn't matter. It's really about what you enjoy. And I mean, even if you do that, Trev, it's not the end of the world if you have that in there. But I would always work with odds. Instead of doing 10 pieces, I would probably do 11, or I'd do 9. And you want to look at the shape. You know, you can do symmetrical and you can stack them if it's different images but the frame is all the same. But consider when you're doing a gallery wall, think about that shape. You know, how do you want that shape to go? Maybe it's lighter here and then gets heavier and then it's lighter down here. Think about that shape because that's also art.
Or if it's coming down the stairs, it may be kind of a slant.
Yeah, and
or
there's a
something
whole way to hang art on the stairs too in terms of because it needs to be stacked.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's really honestly, it's just about how it looks good to you. I think if you keep in mind that you want art to be part of the atmosphere and you don't want it to be too high, because I often see when people do gallery walls, they just start to put the art really high. And then those don't get enjoyed as much. So bring everything down within that space, and it's even okay to do lower, you know, have them a little bit lower.
Last year I saw the Springville Museum of Art posted a video, and of course they're hanging 280 pieces of art for the Spring Salon, and they do a lot of gallery walls with it. And what they did in this video is they cut out a piece of paper the same dimensions of the piece of the art they were trying to hang, and then they taped those pieces on the wall, and then they could configure it up as they
I did
wanted.
that. Yeah, I was going to say I did that once with my mom because she had a bunch of ancestor, our old family pictures, and they were really weird. So yeah, I do remember doing that. It's a great idea. Of course, we can take out the paper and tape them on the wall, and then play around with it that way. That's a fantastic idea.
A couple of questions from standpoint of beginning artists or artists that aren't that well established and don't have a lot of customers or following. Any tips on economical suggestions for framing art, or maybe even DIY options that don't look too still look like they've got good quality?
Yeah. There's a lot of things that you can, we've become more and more, everything's online. So there's things, as far as DIY, I'm not sure I can speak to that necessarily. I guess what I would encourage one to do is to say, go into the frame shop and say, I've got this show, this is what I need, how can I do that? And they can help you. I mean, they can look at it and say, okay, here's what we can do. But I want you to consider something too that, when it's all said and done, if you have to go buy a ready-made at, IKEA or whatever, then that's what you have to do. But I want you to consider that as you're beginning and you're starting out, as you create this relationship with the frame shop and or with the gallery, it starts to become a really good symbiotic relationship. So you can let them know this is what I have, and you can create even a payment plan or things like that where it's like, I want it to be framed well, but I just don't have that kind of money to invest in it. And they can work with you to figure that how that might look like. I'm sure if you search online they can find a lot of frame shops and things like that, or ready-made things that you could buy. I don't know, I can't really speak to that because I would really encourage you to work with a frame shop, custom frame shop. Because of course that's the business I'm in, but also it's taking it to that next level, and I know it's a big investment, but when you're wanting to enter and you're wanting to sell your artwork, sometimes that's what's required because it tells a story about your art piece. And there have been art pieces that are framed really well that there's value add in that. So Here's another thing I just thought of too. Oftentimes, at least with Alpine, when we have people come and reframe their work, often they don't want to keep the frame. And so they say, oh, well, we'll ask, do you want this frame? They're like, no, you can have it. What are you going to do with it? And I said, well, we donate it to artists. They're like, oh, that's great. They love that. So I have collected, and I'm not collecting all of them, because some of them I wouldn't put it on another art piece. But if it's a good quality frame, we'll hang on to them. So then when we do shows, or then when an artist comes in, I can say, let me see what we've got. And then we can work that way where we've got, then we can spend a little bit of money maybe on the matting or the mounting of it, but not, and then you've got that frame for free.
Great.
So that's great with a frame shop, because there are ways that you can work around that and honor your artwork. I've also had pieces that come in from artists that I know and that the client wants to reframe them, and so I'll call the artist and say, hey, they're going to reframe it. Do you want to get the frame? And they will. They'll come pick up the frame. So then they can use that frame again. And if it's a good quality frame, they can. You know what I mean? Because it stays well. So that's what we do. So check in, and certainly check in with me. Because I don't always, but I do have some that I can give you. We create those, doing that custom framing.
That's great. A couple of gallery questions. What advice would you give to artists hoping to work with a gallery? Say you're relatively new and hoping to get your work shown in a gallery. What advice would you give to artists?
I would first look at the different galleries and see who fits me and my work. Gallery Stroll produces a book every year for all the different galleries around Salt Lake City. So you can visit those galleries. I might just, if they're working by appointment, or even just schedule to just walk in and take a look at it. Take a look at the art that's up on the walls. Take a look at their website, see what artists they represent, and see if that's a good fit for you. Some art galleries are very exclusive in who they represent. So you just want to see, is that a good fit for me? And then I would recommend, so do your homework first. Do a little bit of research on that gallery. Go into the space, participate in Gallery Stroll, that's every third Friday, and go to these different places. And I think Ogden does it, and Park City does it as well. I think Park City is the last Friday. But go to these gallery shows and look at what's up on the wall. That tells you a little bit about that gallery. And then I would also make an appointment. So if you do want to make an appointment with the curator, I'd send an email first, find out who curates, or you can call, who can I reach out to, because then they can give you, I know for me, I get so pulled sometimes that I want to give the artist my undivided attention, and sometimes I'm good at it, and sometimes I'm not. But if I have an appointment scheduled, it kind of puts me in that mind frame so that I can give them the respect and the time that they need to talk about their work. So sometimes when someone just shows up, it's a little, you just get caught off guard, because seldom does a gallery say, great, we'll put you in a show tomorrow. They have to think it through. So there's a lot going on for the gallery owner before they're able to make that commitment. So if you want to respect their time, they'll do the same with you. And here's another piece of advice. Never ever talk to a curator or gallery director at a show. If you're going to these gallery shows on a Friday night, that's not the time to talk to the gallery about your artwork, the gallery director or curator. You can find out who it is and introduce yourself, and say, hey, I'll be in touch with you. I'd like to chat with you about my art. That's appropriate. But don't spend time, because that gallery person, the gallery director, they're working that show. They've got to pay attention to what's going on. And it's not an appropriate time to start talking about, hey, how can I get into this gallery? And it's so tempting, I totally get it. But I would just introduce myself, make sure you have a card or something, or find out who they are, and follow up with an email. and then say, you know, hey, I loved your show, and I'd like to talk about how I can get my artwork in there. So those are the two things I think. First, find out, look at the galleries and see, is this a good fit for me first before you approach?
Yeah.
And then that would help.
Is it accurate to say that be prepared for it to take a little while too? I mean, at first you're maybe getting on their radar screen, and maybe they start to follow you on Instagram or something like that. And just like you said, it's not going to be an overnight process where we've got a show next month, we want you in it.
Yeah.
And then you may be that good.
Yeah. Well, and every gallery is different. We're primarily a frame shop, and we have a gallery. So our gallery is an opportunity for us to support emerging and established artists. It's an opportunity for us to host events in which we can work with our community and bring the value and the beauty of art, the dignity of art to their home. So that's why we participate in this. But it's not something that's necessarily our bread and butter. So with other galleries where it is, their rules and their way of working might be a little bit different.
Maybe not even do free.
Yeah. So you've got to just be aware of who this gallery is, what they do, and maybe even just ask around. And a good way too is if you visit a couple of times at those gallery shows, you can kind of get an idea of how they're working. And along that, I just want to mention one thing about, I've noticed this trend of some artists that use galleries for a great place to show their artwork and then undermine the gallery by selling direct to the artist. And I want to speak to that briefly because here's what's going to happen. And I've talked to a lot of different gallery directors that have gotten out of the business because artists undermining the value of the gallery. Oftentimes, galleries don't make any money when they do the show. And I know I've heard the artists say, but I'm spending all this time and you're getting 50% or 40% or whatever it is, and I'm spending all, this is my artwork. Yes, you're right, absolutely. And when I hang shows, I don't get paid. So there are times that I work that I don't get paid for. So I work for free, often, because I value what I do and what I want to bring to our community. So it has to be a relationship that we honor one another and we are aware of that. And it's all about integrity. I mean, I'm not the particular gallery curator that's going to police that. You know, there's contracts you put in place and you hope that people honor that. But your pricing should be consistent. So if you're selling on Etsy or you're selling at one gallery that gives you 70% of the sale and you're selling at another gallery that gives you 50%, you don't change prices. Because when you do that, you devalue your work. Your price should always be consistent. Whether you sell online, whether you sell personally, or whether you sell through a gallery. Because then that creates this uneasiness because, you know, it's a digital age and everybody's finding out what those costs are. It creates this uneasiness with like, well, wait a minute, I saw this online for $50 and you're selling it over here for $200. So then when galleries find that out, they talk and then they're like, yeah, I'm not gonna show that. I won't show that person in the gallery. So you just need to respect that relationship and understand that there's a lot of work that goes into sharing your art, and you don't, I mean, I would hate for galleries to go away. I really would, because honestly, just in the 10 years that I've been involved, people in my life who never bought art before are buying artwork and they're seeing the value of it. And you buy one piece of art, one piece of original art, and I'm telling you, that's not your first. You're gonna buy more. You can't go back. You can't go back to those, to the ones you find at the decorative stores, you know? And so these are such great spaces to see the artwork up on the wall, to really celebrate the talents of the people that are creating these masterpieces. So really honor that. And when you work with that level of integrity, I promise you it will come back. It will come back to you. And there are artists that I was telling Rob, there are artists that I work with because they show up for me. When I need them, they show up for me. And so I'll bend over backwards for them. And what that means is I'll drive to, you know, American Fork or Provo or whatever, pick up their art piece, or I've even driven up to Logan. So there's a value in what I'm willing to do, you know, what gallery workers are willing to do if we feel like there's this symbiotic relationship, because if I'm successful, you're successful, and vice versa. You know, we need one another, and yes, you can sell online, and you can be quite successful, and I hope for you to be successful. And so we want to be able to work together so that we kind of keep creating these experiences and these places to see your art. I just had a call today of a woman who said, I saw this art piece 2 years ago. Do you still have it? And she described it, and I knew what she was talking about, and it's available, so I'm facilitating the sale now. When I hang these pieces, I create a little relationship. Like, I get to know what these pieces are, and I know when someone calls and they remember, I can remember, I don't know what it is, but I can recall what those pieces are. So someone sees that art piece, and they might go a couple of years, and I always say to them, like, listen, if it's sneaking up on you, you need to buy that piece. I mean, there's a reason for that. So I would just ask that you honor that relationship and consider that your gallery they're a partner in your success.
Last question is kind of along the same lines. As the curator of the shows that you hold here at Alpine, what are you looking for in artists and art for the shows that you curate here?
It's a good question, and it changes. As I'm kind of working and I'm reading and kind of seeing what's happening, my purpose, and every curator is different, is I want to educate people on art. Gosh, how many times has there been like an abstract on the wall and people walk through, I can do that, I can do that, that's no big deal, right? And so I want to educate them. I'm like, well, how come you haven't? And actually, there's actually a whole way to do abstracts that don't seem so chaotic. So I want to educate the patron as they come through. So what I look for is someone who values what they do and believes in what they do, and honors when they honor what their piece is like. It's easy for me. That it's all about the energy thing. It's like, I got something valuable here, and I love what I'm doing, and it's unique, and I'm creative, and I love that. I have artists sometimes who are like, I can do that. What do you want me to do? I'll paint that, I'll paint this. I don't want to create art just for art's sake. I want you to create what speaks to you. If figurative is what you are passionate about, then do that. And let's try to figure out a way, because figurative sometimes doesn't always sell, but I worked with one artist. We're like, okay, well, tell me more about this. What are you wanting to create? So we can find ways to create shows that draw interest and educate. So I think what I'm looking for when I work with an artist is someone that's willing to collaborate with me, and kind of we work together to come up with shows, and that they're patient. Like, I am patient with artists because they're never on time. I shouldn't say never, but seldom they're on time. They don't fill out the paperwork correctly, and I try to be a little more lenient because I know how I am. Like, I can be, maybe I have a little bit of that ADHD or whatever. So I find myself sort of being a bit flighty. And so I want to be able to kind of honor that too with creative, because my creativity comes in how I create the shows or how I hang the shows. So I just want someone that I can collaborate with, that respects the process, and that has something interesting to show, you know? Not just, I'll create whatever you want. No, what's interesting? What can we talk about? How can we educate? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Great. Well, Susan, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us this evening.
You're welcome.
That concludes our evening. This is our December educational event, and hopefully you found it of value. We so appreciate Susan taking her time and sharing her expertise and knowledge both on the framing front and gallery front. These are all very relevant topics for members of ISA. So we'll sign off for now, and we'll see you back again in January.
Merry Christmas,
Merry
Happy
Christmas, and
holidays.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.